sleep while they're here. So you have no excuse to stay awake. We got some caffeine coffee or decaf. I say decaf or decal. It depends on how you look at it. So we're privileged that today, as our pastor's away, we want to remember him in prayer today, and they're enjoying their refreshing time down in Indiana, celebrating their birthdays and so forth, and being with their parents. And today we're blessed to have the Barkers back with us again, and his wife Lauren, and it's going to be playing the piano for us. And I hope that she'll be able to get used to my song leading as I try to lead some song leading. All right, so Brother Barker, why don't you just come and give what God's laid upon your heart? You got a good 45 minutes here to lay it out for us. God bless you, brother.
Right. Well, it is good to be back with you all. I'm going to move this just a little bit there. And the last time we were here was in the spring, and we were, I think, married 3 months at that point. We're married 7 months now, so if anybody needs some marriage advice, you can come ask me. I'm just kidding. That's right. We're still figuring it out and having a blast doing so. And we're in the middle. Well, not middle. We just finished our 4th week of camp at Camp Kobiak. And it's been a full summer so far. Every week has been full. This last week, extremely so. And, of course, the youth from the church came up during family camp and helped us in the kitchen. And that was a huge blessing. And then they came back the next week for camp, and it was awesome to see how God worked and just the encouragement that they were, and then how God spoke in their lives and the lives of the campers that we've had. So we've got 2 more weeks coming up. Those are both full weeks as well. And it's just been a full summer. It's been a great summer. We get beautiful days, and they fly by. I tell people time flies when you're having fun or working at camp, or when you're having fun working at camp. And we get to do the last. It really is. But we enjoy every second of it, and then we sleep a lot on the weekends when we get the chance. So we'll go to Psalm 139 this morning. Psalm 139 is where we'll be. And we'll just walk through this psalm. And of course, the Psalms are songs that David, most of them written by David, as kind of almost a journal entry. And we would think, okay, it's kind of weird to read somebody's journal, but David was really one of those guys that recorded everything that he was doing, going through, and some people look at Psalms and they say, well, this is proof that David was someone who struggled with depression and someone who might have been imbalanced in some ways. I tend to think that David was just a normal guy. He just had good days and bad days. And the only difference is he chose to write about them. But what's beautiful is every bad day that he has, every psalm that you read that starts out in misery or frustration or despair, that's not where it ends. Every psalm that starts that way, when you come to the end of it, there's some verse where David says, I will put my trust in the Lord God, but I know what God has for me, or my God is good. And he always comes back to resting, trusting, and relying on God. And so I don't know that he was depressed. I think he was just human. Exactly. I think he was just human. And I think he could write a lot better than I can. And so that's why you read his Psalms and not mine. But we're going to just read through Psalm 139 this morning. And just kind of take a look at what it is that David lays out here. And this one, I don't know. Some of them you can really plainly see what David's going through. This one, I don't know. I think maybe there's a lot in this passage that David is just kind of pouring his heart out to God. Maybe this was just a moment of he said, you know what, I just need to talk to God about some things. But we'll just start reading, and then we'll kind of break it down. He says, verse 1, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my down sitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off. Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain unto it. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning, and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. Even the night, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee. For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect. And in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. For they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies take thy name in vain. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? And am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. This passage there's a lot here, but it really is a beautiful passage. And so this morning, as we just kind of delve into it, I hope that it's an encouragement for you. I hope that it's a comfort for you. But we'll take a look at how that is. Let's just pray real quick, though, before we jump into it. God, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning. God, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for Pastor and his family. And God, I pray that you would just give them a refreshing, restful time away. God, I pray that you would keep them safe, that you would bring them back to this community, to this church. And God, I pray that as they are gone this morning, I pray that you would meet with us. God, that you would use me to share your word with your people. And God, I pray that you would speak to my heart as well as theirs. And all of this I pray. Amen. When this passage, we'll break it down into two main headings. We'll say that God has searched me because of who he is. And that'll be kind of the first portion of this passage. And then the second portion of this psalm will say, I want God to search me because of who I am. That's kind of the two main breakdowns we'll look at. And when I was growing up, to give you a little bit of a history of my dad, I grew up, I was born in Pensacola, Florida. My dad was born in Michigan. He's from the Rockford area. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. Okay, a couple of you guys. So my grandpa Judd, that'd be my dad's dad, was a farmer in Rockford, Michigan, and he was a dairy farmer, and he had a bunch of apple orchards. But he passed away when my dad was 11. He died of cancer. And so my dad, who had an older sister and a mom, is now the man of the house at 11 years old. And not just any house, he's the man of a dairy farm that also has a bunch of apple orchards. And so there was a lot of growing up that my dad did really quickly. And the little that he had spent with his father meant a lot to him. And one of the things that he remembered very vividly from his childhood was that my grandpa Judd had John Deere tractors. That is what he used on the farm. In fact, to bring the story full circle, okay, my dad, he ended up, as he was graduating high school, he went 4 years out of high school working. God just kind of got a hold of his heart, said, I have something for you that I want you to do in ministry. So he surrendered to ministry. He went down to Pensacola Christian College, studied there for 4 years, met his wife, and they got married. They lived down there for 11 years. On church staff, they worked on church staff there. And then in 2003, my father felt God leading him to a church. And the church that reached out to my father was a church in Lake Odessa, Michigan. Lake Odessa, Michigan, down near Grand Rapids. It's about 30 minutes east of Grand Rapids. If you were to draw a line between Grand Rapids and Lansing, cut it right down the middle, you'd see Lake Odessa on the map. So the church was from Lake Odessa, and God led us up to Lake Odessa, Michigan. Well, my grandpa Judd had gone and had bought a tractor from a tractor dealership that was located in Lake Odessa, Michigan. And when he went and bought that tractor, he also got my dad a little model tractor of that tractor, okay? And so just to kind of bring the story full circle, my dad had a model tractor that was bought in Lake Odessa, Michigan by his father, who has passed away. And so when my dad became a pastor in Lake Odessa, there was a really powerful connection there. So my dad's office, he's now been in Lake Odessa for 20 years pastoring. And if you were to walk into his office, you would think that he traveled the country promoting John Deere products. Everything's John Deere's everywhere. He's got shelves of models, and then everybody in the church, if they don't know much about my dad, but they've been in his office, they say, well, we can get him John Deere stuff for Christmas. And so he's got John Deere trains and salt and pepper shakers and mugs and you name it, lunch boxes, he's got it, John Deere something. And he's got a John Deere blanket. He's got a shirt that someone got him from New Mexico when they visited that has the John Deere logo, but it's got a donkey on it, and it says Juan Deere instead of John Deere because it came down from New Mexico way. Anyways, so he's got all sorts of stuff in there. But the reason that it's all decorated John Deere is because there's a very strong sentimental attachment to that he associates with his father. And so he feels a closeness to my grandpa Judd because of the John Deere stuff. So I forget when it was. I probably was 12 years old. So this would be 15 years ago. I'm starting to get up there. 15 years ago, my dad and I, growing up in Florida, every Saturday morning we would go to Home Depot. And Home Depot had a building time where they would give you a kit, and a father and son or daughter and son or daughter and dad would build this kit. So sometimes they were tree houses or pencil boxes. You know, they were nothing ever really difficult, but you could do this together. I don't know if I think some of you guys are familiar with that. And they would give you an apron, and then for every project you completed, you got a pin that went with it. And we went so often that I would pin them to the top of my apron, and the top of my apron started falling down because it was so heavy with all the pins that were poked through it. And so we used to just do that. That was an awesome thing to do. We lived in the city, but we could go to Home Depot, and we could do something together. And so my dad and I would do that. And so when we moved up to Michigan, we were a ways from Home Depot. That wasn't something we got to do as much. So there was one day where we had a bunch of scrap wood left over from some project, and they were different kinds of wood, and none of it was like really desirable, different lengths and everything. But my dad and I just thought, it'd be cool let's just build something together. That would just be fun. And so we built a birdhouse, okay, that was never intended to actually house a bird because the hole on the front wasn't, I think it was like that big. Like nothing's going to get in there. Except for some hornets. And so we built it. We had fun building it. We used a bunch of really weird pieces of wood. and then we spray painted it yellow and green, and we got John Deere stickers and we stuck them all over it. Okay, so that it's not a great it's not a great birdhouse. It's a floor model, really. You're not going to live in it if you're a bird. That birdhouse was never intended to sit outside. What my dad did with that birdhouse is he took it and he stuck it in his office. So if you're sitting in my dad's office, you'll see this random kind of ugly looking birdhouse, and you'll think, okay, well, why is that there? Well, the reason it's there is because it wasn't really the value that, it wasn't the value of the wood that we used. It wasn't really the value of the fact that it was a rare tree house built by Barker and Sons. Okay, none of that went into it. But there's a lot of value in that tree house for my dad. Because that tree, and for me, yeah. Because that tree house helps kind of provide a sentimental link between his dad and his son. And it marries kind of those generations together, even though we've never been able to have that connection in life. Someday when we have to clean out my dad's office, that tree house will probably end up somewhere in my house, and my wife will have to figure out how to hide it so nobody sees it. But for anybody else, they'd probably just put it on a burn pile. But for me, it means something. And you would look at that tree house and you'd say, yeah, but there's a hole here, and that screw's sticking up, and this piece of wood has a crack in it. And there's a lot, trust me, there's a lot of flaws in that tree house. And I remember all of them because I was one of the guys that made it. I remember what pieces of wood we used, and I remember what they looked like. The piece that we used on the bottom was way too big for what it needed to be, but it was way too thick, but it fit the bottom, and then it had a knot on the side of it that had fallen out, so then we were trying to figure out the place to put that knot so that you couldn't see it from the front. And there's a lot I remember about that tree house, or that birdhouse. And it means something to me because I made it. And I made it for the purpose of the connection between me and my dad and my grandpa. Okay. In this passage that we look at, we're going to look at a couple different things. But just remember the fact that God made you and I. And the very fact that God made us gives us value. But then to know that he made us for a purpose. And then on top of that, to know that the God who made us and made us on purpose for a purpose knows us and knows us intimately. And so that's just what we're going to look at. And hopefully as we talk through it, that birdhouse, as silly as that is, will help us understand or make that connection. God has searched me because of who he is. Okay, he's God. He's my creator God. And he knows everything about me. The first passage of Psalm 139, we can draw this, if you're interested in writing things down, the main heading would be that we are intimately known. We are so intimately known by God. What does David say about how God knows him? Well, he says in verse 2, thou knowest my downsitting and my uprising. By the way, verse 1, he says, thou hast searched me and known me. There's a past tense there. God has already done this. Well, why has God already searched us and known us? Well, it's because of who he is. He is our creator God. David says, verse 2, thou knowest my downsitting and my uprising. God knows how many times today I've stood up and sat down. Has anybody else kept track of that yet today? Anybody say? Okay. I think maybe if I started, I could get pretty close to how many times I've stood up and sat down already today. But God cares enough about me to know how many times I've stood up and sat down. He continues, he says, thou understandest my thought afar off. Even before I've really thought my thought, God already knows what it is that I'm thinking. God knows. He knows how many times I stand up and sit down. He knows all my thoughts. Verse 3, thou compassest my path and my lying down and art acquainted with all my ways. God's activity, his capacity, and his influence extend to my personal journey. Okay, there's nowhere on this path of life where God is not active in it. He compasses my path. He's acquainted with all my ways. He understands where it is that I'm going, and he's familiar with all of it. He knows the words. He knows all of my words before I even speak them. Verse number 4. There is not a word on my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. I don't even have to say something, and he already knows it. He knows what I'm going to say. You and I are so intimately known by our Creator God. Out of the 8 billion people in this world, out of the billions upon billions upon billions of people that have existed since time began, God knows you so intimately. He cares about you so much. There's not a thing that happens in life that he's not aware of. The Bible talks about the fact that he knows if a sparrow falls to the ground. He knows how many hairs are on your head. I don't even know how many hairs are on my head, okay? For some of us, there's fewer than others. Okay, yeah. Some of us, it becomes easier to count every day. But God is so familiar with you and I. He knows me better than my mom knows me. He knows me better than my wife knows me. He knows me better than I know myself. And we can either, as you said, that's sometimes a scary thought. And I think a lot of times we choose to be scared by that. Oh man, are you sure that God knows everything about me? Yeah, like everything though? Are you sure there's not one thing he doesn't know about me? No, it's everything.
We don't want our neighbor to know everything.
Exactly. Yeah, there's things that I don't want my mom to know about. But God already knows. So we can either choose to be scared by that, or we can choose to say, you know, I'm so thankful that I serve a God and that I have a God who knows everything about me. That there is nothing that happens in my life that God he's not already seen, he's not already prepared for, he doesn't already know. The story of Jonah is so interesting to me. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I am getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about Jonah in a second. Okay, you and I were intimately known by God. But then also, David's going to talk about the fact that you and I are purposely made by God. He says, if you skip down to verse 13, thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. God was so intricate in our creation that he was involved in every part of it. When we were in our mother's womb, the Bible says he knew what we were. He was involved in forming me. He controls my inner being from the womb. He saw my substance, my frame, my strength in the womb. Verse 15, David says, my substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. David says, listen, there was so much intentionality that went into creating me, that God wrote about me in a book. There's no part of me that's an accident. There is no part of me that is a development of millions upon millions upon millions of years. I'm not just some higher life form of an animalistic culture. I am an intimate, intricate, fearfully and wonderfully made creation of God. And because God made me, I have value. I was purposely made. I work with the juniors at camp, and I tell them all the time that we were made on purpose for a purpose. It's the fact that we were made on purpose that gives us value. But then it's the fact that we were also made for a purpose that increases that value. And no matter who we are in this church, in this world, if we are sitting here today, it's because God has said, I want you to be on this earth for a reason. And there is a group of a generation of young people, and they're not always young people now, that say, well, I don't know why God still has me here. I don't know why God is doing this. I'm not doing anything for God. He would never want to use me. The things that I've done, God could never overlook. I'm just a waste, and it would be better if I weren't even here. And those are lies from the devil, because God has us here for a purpose. And David says, listen, I was purposely made by a wonderful creator. Fearfully and wonderfully made. God's intentional in forming me in the womb. He took time, exactness, power, intentionality to create me. He wrote about me in a book. I am not an accident. So he says in verse 14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and I'm one of your works, God. I'm marvelous. And I don't say that as like, oh, wow, look, I'm marvelous. No, it's a simple fact that I know that there is value in my life because of who made me. And it's marvelous. Our camp director, he has said, although through modern scientific observation we understand some things, such as conception, the embryo, the zygote, DNA, and genetics, the creation of human life in the womb still simply remains a miracle. God's creation of you and I in the womb is a miracle. You and I are purposely made on purpose for a purpose. And whether you're 16 or whether you're 60, if you're here, God still has a purpose for your life. So you and I, we are intimately known by this Creator God. There is nothing in our life that He doesn't know. And we can either choose to be scared by that, and if we're scared by that, then maybe there's something that we need to take care of that shouldn't be in our life. Because ultimately, the fact that we are so intimately known by our Creator God should be such a comfort. That there is nothing in this life and nothing in this world that would ever take place that God doesn't already know about. We are purposely made. And then this is Psalm 139, this is verse 7. We are never alone. He says, verse 7, if you look back, whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, if flee to the ends of the earth, basically, even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. If I try to go anywhere in this world, I can't even get away from God. I am never alone. His Spirit is everywhere. Whither shall I go from thy Spirit, David says. If I ascend up into heaven, that's your dwelling place. If I go into the depths of hell, you are present there. If I take the wings of the morning and spread out to the far sides of the sea, you're still there. There's nowhere that I can flee from your Spirit or your presence. Jonah. All right, now I'm not getting ahead of myself. I got to preach this summer to juniors, and one of the stories I shared with them is the story of Jonah. And in the book of Jonah chapter 1, verse 1, God appears to Jonah, and he says, Jonah, arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and preach against it the preaching that I bid thee. Okay, so if we know the story, Jonah rises up and he goes to where? He goes the opposite direction to a place called Tarshish. It's just a fun word to say, Tarshish. But he was supposed to go to Nineveh. But the Bible has some very interesting wording. It says that Jonah arose to to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. Jonah's desire was to get as far away from God as possible. So he gets on a ship and he goes in the opposite direction of where he's supposed to be going. And what is so cool about this story, okay? We're talking about the fact that we can never be absent from the presence of God, okay? So Jonah flees to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. And on the way to Tarshish, a great storm arises. And they're trying to unladen the boat from all of its weights, and they go through the whole process of realizing that Jonah is the reason, and they say, Jonah, why are you the reason that this is happening? And Jonah says, because I serve the one true God, and he told me to do something, and I'm not doing it. And I'm sorry, what? You serve the true God, and you're disobeying him? Well, no wonder. And he said, the only way that the storm is going to stop is if you throw me overboard. You got to throw me overboard. And they say, well, we're not killers. We're not doing that. And they do everything they can, again, to save the ship until they come to the point that unless they cast Jonah overboard, they're all going to die. And so they throw Jonah overboard. And the Bible has the wording again here, so beautiful. It says that God had prepared a fish to swallow up Jonah. So Jonah, who was told by God to go to Nineveh, and rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, serves a God who knows all that's going to happen. Serves a God who is present in that storm. And serves a God who is present enough to prepare a fish to swallow Jonah when he disobeys God and gets thrown overboard. Jonah was hoping that God wasn't everywhere. And then when he got thrown overboard, he was so thankful that God was. See, when we don't live right, when we're not right with God, when there's something that, some aspect of the Christian life that we are either ignoring or we are just not worried about, or there's some area that we're falling short, our hope is, well, I hope God isn't everywhere. I hope God doesn't know everything about me. And yet, when things are right with God, and when times do get tough, we say, God, I'm so thankful that you're everywhere, and I'm so thankful that you know everything about me, and I'm so thankful that none of this is a surprise to you. We can choose to either be scared by the fact that God knows everything about us because he is God, or we can be thankful that God knows everything about us because he is God. In this passage, David says, listen, I can't go anywhere to get away from God. His hand is holding me. Verse 10, even there shall thy hand lead me. Thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. God's presence is available all the time. He created everything in this world. There's nothing in this world, including ourselves, that could ever be separated or distant from the knowledge and the sovereignty and the presence of God. And so David in this passage says, listen, I'm so thankful that there is a God who knows me because of who he is. I am intimately known by this Creator God. I am purposely made on purpose for a purpose, and I am never alone because of this God. But then the second half, or not really a half, but the second portion of this passage, he looks at, okay, so God knows everything about me because of who he is. He's my creator. Just like I knew all about that birdhouse because I was one of the guys that made it. I know all the flaws, and it still means something to me. God made me. He knows everything about me, and I still mean something to him. Okay, so then David transitions, and he doesn't say, listen, God knows me because of who he is. Now I want God to know me because of who I am. David says, listen, there's one thing I know about myself. I am not a perfect man. And there are things about me that are not always right. So now instead of saying God has searched me and known me because of himself as creator God, he says, God, I want you now to search me and know me because of who I am. Know my heart. We'll start with God's thoughts about me. And this is probably, that stuff's good. I really like the stuff in the first half, but this is probably my favorite part of this chapter. David says, verse 17, how precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them. What does that word precious mean? If somebody were to use the word precious, what does it bring to mind for you? Yeah, valuable, absolutely. Probably maybe the most valuable thing that you would have. I don't describe everything as precious, but my grandmother, was born and raised in the hills of Tennessee. So my mom's mom. She's an amazing cook. I love all her food. She's lives down in Florida, but she's just, we call her Mimi. She's my southern grandma. And one of the things that she will say, and she's got 4 great grandbabies now, one of the things that she will say whenever she sees those grandbabies or a picture of her grandbabies, she'll just say, oh, they're just so precious. They're just so precious. What is she saying? Well, she's saying that you couldn't put a value. You couldn't put a price tag. You couldn't put a monetary amount on what that little one means to her. The Bible says that God's thoughts towards us are precious. That there is no amount of value that could be placed on what God thinks of us. Not only are they precious, it says that they're innumerable. How great is the sum of them? If I should count them, verse 18, they're more in number than the sand. This one was what blew me away. So I've been alive for 27 years. And in those 27 years and before those 27 years, God has thought about me so many times that his thoughts towards me are more than the number of all the sand on all the beaches in the world and all the sand in all the oceans in the world. And that is a lot. And to think about me, that's one of 8 billion people currently in existence. And to think about the fact that I mean so much to God, that he's thought about me that much. And we get sometimes caught up in the trap of, well, God doesn't really care about me. If God cared about me, then this wouldn't be happening. Or if God cared about me, then life wouldn't be the way it is. And the reality of it is, God cares about you so much. He's thought about you so much that you and I can't even fathom the number of thoughts that he has had about us, the number of times that our name has gone through his head. I'm so thankful for a creator God who cares about me that much. His thoughts toward us, they're precious. You can't put a price tag on them. They're innumerable. There's something that we just simply have to look at and say, God, why do I mean so much to you? He cares about us and thinks about us so much. So David then, he says, I want to acknowledge something, God. I know that I mean something to you, a great something to you. And because I mean something to you, I want you to mean something to me. And he says, God, it really bothers me when I come up against ungodly men. The next several verses, he says, surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. They speak evil against thee wickedly. Thine enemies, they take thy name in vain. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? And am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies. He said, listen, these ungodly men understand that they hate God, they blaspheme his name, they speak evil against him, they rise up against him, and it bothers me because this is the God that cares about me, that the God that I mean something to, and if I mean something to him, he needs to mean something to me. And so this bothers me. And I'm afraid that sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, we are not as careful as we should be in saying, okay, there are people in this world that are simply ungodly people. They hate God, they blaspheme his name, they have no respect for who he is as their creator. And a lot of times, we just say, hey, listen, you know what, it's no big deal, they didn't really mean it, or we'll allow them into our homes through TV, and we say, it's okay, it's not a big deal. And I'm not saying that we need to be hateful or cut people off, but I'm saying that maybe there should be a stand that we take.
Amen.
To simply say, listen, that's not okay. Because that's my God that you're either talking about or shouting against or disrespecting. And David says, listen, I mean something to God. And that means that God needs to mean something to me. And that means he needs to mean something to you too. So these ungodly men, I'm not having it. But then he ends the passage. We're coming right down to it. Verse number 23 and 24. He started by saying, hey, God, you've searched me and you've known me because of who you are. You're God. You created me. You know me intimately. You made me purposely. You've never left me alone. But God, now, my desire is that you search me and know me.
Is that our desire?
Yeah, that should be, right?
There should be.
That's what David says. He says, my desire, God, I know that you've done this because of who you are. But now, God, I'm asking you to do this because of who I am.
A lot of us don't want to know how we
Yeah. He says, God, would you search me? Would you try me? Would you test me? Anybody in here enjoy taking tests? Tests were a long time ago, okay. Okay. In school, okay, anytime that I studied for a test and I thought, yeah, I'm going to do really well on this test, I got like a C. But then anytime I forgot to study, I did like really well and got an A. Does anybody else like that? Okay. Okay, all right. I just am weird. That's fine. I don't know what it is, but I think in modern school, okay, we look at a test as something that we have to get a good grade on to pass the class. When in reality, the purpose of a test is to see whether or not you and I are learning the lessons that are being taught. If they're actually something that's sticking with us. It's simply to gauge if we're getting it. There's a lot of lessons that God tries to teach us in life. And the purpose of testing in life is for God to say, okay, man, they really got that one. They understood what it is that they were supposed to learn. Or, as probably the case is with me a lot, he did not get that. Too stubborn, not paying attention, too distracted. Whatever the case may be, he needs to learn that lesson again. And David says, God, I want you to search me. There's a heart here that I don't even know all of. So God, would you search me? And then he says, God, I want you to try me. I want you to test me, God. And I want you to see if I'm actually measuring up to the standard. God, am I really getting it? And then he says, God, I want you to cleanse me. See if there be any wicked way in me. God, is there something in my life that's between you and I that's separating our fellowship that I need to get right? And then he says, God, would you lead me in the way everlasting? See, we said God's thoughts towards us, they're precious. They're innumerable. God thinks about us so much. We mean so much to him. He should mean something to us. So David says, God, my thoughts towards you, I want you to search me and know me. I want you to test me and try me. I want you to cleanse me. And I want you to lead me. God, I want this life to be determined not by what I think works or what I think will pay well, but God, to be determined by what it is that you want to do with me, because I know that I was made on purpose for a purpose. So God, would you guide me so I can fulfill your purpose for my life? David's just an everyday guy who made some massive mistakes, a guy who was a man after God's own heart. And I firmly believe that he's called a man after God's own heart because of the Psalm 139 mentality. He says, God, my desire is to know you as you know me. My desire is to think about you as you think about me. Because we are intimately known. We're purposely made. We're never alone. His thoughts towards us are precious and innumerable. So why shouldn't we think about him? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this passage. Thank you so much for these truths. God, the beautiful reminder of Psalm 139. And God, I pray that we would be willing to say, God, would you search me and know me? That we might be willing to allow you to search our hearts so that we can understand who we are. And if there's something in our life that's between us and you, God, that we can get it taken care of. Because we know that we're purposely made and we are intimately known by you, and you've never left us alone, and you have a specific purpose for our life. And God, there's nothing greater we can do than accomplish the awesome purpose that you have created us for. God, thank you for this reminder from David. Would we take it? Would we chew on it? Would we meditate on it? And God, would we apply it in our lives? I pray in your name. Amen.